glad to see everybody enjoying fellowshipping and seeing Tracy and Andy with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here, and everybody joining us. Maybe if you're joining us online, we appreciate you joining in. You probably thought we weren't having church because it's like 7 minutes after, but anyway, you can blame that on me. I was just talking and
not paying attention. Not a technical issue this time.
No, it wasn't a technical issue. It wasn't Michael's fault. It was definitely mine. He just wasn't paying attention at the time. He turned the lights on, but I was just kept on. I didn't pay attention. Then I looked back there and saw his face, and I was like, "Oh, gotta go." Anyway, welcome tonight to this middle of the week. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes you look forward to this middle of the week where you can just get a little bit of have some encouragement from your brothers and sisters, and also hear something from the Lord that hopefully encourages you and helps you along your way as well. So tonight we're going to be looking in chapter 18, been going through the book of Acts, and we're Acts 18 now. And if we had to title it, we're going to call it Friends in Low Places. How many of you know, you ever watch these superhero movies, how they provide a lot of helpful details and insight into the life of a person who you wouldn't otherwise know through their great feats. So, if you just looked at Superman, you just saw, okay, he's just a guy who can, stop bullets and, outrun planes or trains, and fly with a cape and such. You wouldn't know, as much about him if you didn't know his backstory, kind of where he came from, the planet he came from, and his family situation, and, knowing his weakness and all that kind of thing. So you know more about him with that backstory. Same goes for like Batman and Spider-Man. You know their background story because of that. They have what motivates them, right? So you know that about them. And Captain Marvel explains a lot about her background as well as connects a lot of the dots in many of the Marvel movies that have been so popular as of late. Well, today's passage, Acts chapter 18, reveals much of the background about the Apostle Paul and his connection to the church at Corinth. Really, we start beginning to see the origins of the church at Corinth right here in Acts chapter 18. So, the reason why I say it's friends in low places is because if you think about Corinth at the time, it was the largest and most diverse city in Greece. Remember, this is where Paul is now ministering. He's left Macedonia, Thessalonica. He's gone across the Aegean Sea now to where he is ministering in Greece. And he started in Athens and kind of got moved on to now Corinth. And so Greece is the most Roman city, or I should say Corinth, is the most Roman city of Greece. It's actually the city of commerce, and it connects the eastern and the western trade there. So very, very bustling, popular area to live, with a large group of resettled Romans. It was also a major center of commerce, so a place with actually a low reputation. Matter of fact, there's a Greek word that's translated to live like a Corinthian, and literally it means to live immorally. And so this was it was like a cesspool of immorality and sexual perversion. There was it was like anything goes in that culture because it was part of their worship, or part of their kind of religion, in worshiping the god of fertility, Venus, that they could just have, these kind of relationships, sexual relationships, and it didn't matter, the rules about that. So this section of Acts, while displaying the characteristics feature of quickly recounting Paul's journeys without excessive detail, it gives us crucial background into the later writings of Paul that he would begin writing to the church at Corinth on his third missionary journey. So we're starting to see all the kind of pieces come together, because we know the rest of the story, right? With the New Testament, we're starting to see how this is all going to come to fruition. So tonight we're going to look and see how God provided three things for Paul and his ministry team. First of all, he provided him fellow workers, and he gave him encouragement for the work, and then he gave him protection from harm. So those three things, and that's what we're going to delve into as we look at these verses 1 through 17. So let's read verses 1 through 4 and look at that first kind of thing that God was providing for Paul and his ministry team. Look at verses 1 through 4. It says, "After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. And he came to them. So, because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks." So, the first thing we see God providing for Paul here is fellow workers. Now, Paul had fellow workers, did he not? We've been talking about them. I keep saying Paul and his ministry team. And that's important because sometimes we want to think of Paul as like this Lone Ranger, going out and just superhero, planting churches everywhere he went. People were getting saved and writing letters like it's nothing, New Testament, because he wrote, majority of the New Testament books. He is, attributed to being the author of them. But we know it's not always the case. Obviously, Luke is the author of the book of Acts. So, Luke's there, been following along with Paul for most of his journeys. Not all of that, but for most of it, and certainly now. And then, he came across, he had Silas, because Silas was his traveling partner. Barnabas is no longer with him, but Silas is traveling with him. And also, we know that he picked up Timothy. So we have this whole ministry team, which shows you it's a partnership. It's not just one person. And it takes a team to do God's work. The churches that were planted throughout, that became a part of what we know, all these books that Paul, or these letters that Paul wrote to them, Ephesus, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all these, little books, little letters, or you call them letters, but they're really books of the Bible. They were written to churches that he planted, but it wasn't just him, it was a team of people. So I want to say that right off the bat, that we're all fellow workers, and we're all important, and don't ever think that you're not important because you're not called a pastor, or a preacher, or teacher, or whatever, missionary. You're all important, and we're all here to try to do the work of God. We need one another. So he had these fellow workers. So when he comes to Athens, he's short-handed at the time. Silas is not there. Silas and Timothy are not there yet. Perhaps Paul is with Luke, although Luke, seems to be, keeping himself in the background, as we talk about oftentimes. He doesn't really come forward and say that he's there, but we only assume he is. But he teams up with this couple, this power couple, if you want to call them, Priscilla and Aquila, as they are often referred to in the Bible. Now, Aquila was the man, by the way, the husband. Priscilla was the wife. And any other time, other than here, they are mentioned as the other way around. So we'll see Priscilla and Aquila a lot of times in the New Testament. As here it's mentioned Aquila with his wife Priscilla, but many of the times it's flipped around the other way. And the reason why a lot of Bible scholars think that is flipped around is because Priscilla actually comes from a prominent family in Rome. So she had a prominent family there, probably a wealthy family, influential family. But they were Jewish, and they were born in Rome, obviously, both of them were. But they were expelled by the emperor. The emperor at the time Claudius was wanting everybody, all the Jews, out. Some scholars believe, and by the way, why would you think that he would want the Jews out?
It caused trouble.
Yeah, they caused them trouble. And there were a lot of Jews that were converted to Christianity. A lot of scholars believe this Christianity thing was beginning to take a lot of steam, a lot of kind of getting a lot of momentum. And so he was kind of trying to get rid of all, that kind of influence. If it weren't just the Christians causing the trouble and, having this kind of struggle, it was the Jews being upset with the Christians, and there was all that trouble and strife, as we've seen. Every time Paul turned around, it seemed like the Jews were on his back about, being jealous over what was going on. So, in any case, they had to leave their homeland, and now they're living here in Corinth. And it would make sense they're living there. Their trade is tent making. I read one commentary said that it was similar to like a leather trade, leather work. So it wasn't just building like little pop-up tents, what we might think it is. It may be more like working leather work. So it could have been a bunch of different products that they were making. And, it makes sense they would be in Corinth. It's a very trade-heavy city. And they could do a lot of business there and make a lot of living. And apparently they were doing well because they had so much work they couldn't keep up with it because they had to hire somebody. And so Paul, I don't know whether he's walking along one day and saw a help wanted sign or whatever, he stops in and they said, "You're hired," right? And he got him hired. So he starts working with them. Now, they are either already Christians or they become Christians through working with Paul. Now, it's interesting that I learned this, that priests and scribes were not allowed to collect any kind of money as a result of ministry. So they could not make money through their ministry. So many of these religious leaders would have a trade on the side where they would make themselves money. And so this is kind of how Paul was doing it back then. Later on, remember, Paul would say, "Hey, there's nothing wrong." And in his writing to the Corinthians, he would say there's nothing wrong with somebody who works for the Lord getting paid. Remember? He would say the laborer is worthy of his hire. Don't muzzle the ox when he's, churning in the ox thing. I forget what my mind. But anyway, when he's turning the wheel, don't muzzle the ox, right? Let him eat while he's working. And so the point he was making was ministers deserve to be paid, they're worthy of a hire, that kind of thing. But he did go on to say also that he wasn't going to be a burden to those he ministered to, and so he was choosing to help make money elsewhere. And so this was the case. Later on, the Philippian believers would send money. Remember, there in Philippi, where the jailer, helped. Was saved through the Paul and Silas in the jail, which we learned about. And then Lydia, as a result, probably planting that church there in Philippi. Well, they ended up sending money to support him, and eventually he didn't do the tent making as much and doing his trade as much. He began, focusing more on just the ministry. But we notice here now, he's working all week. And then on Sundays, or Saturday actually, he's out there what? Teaching and preaching, right? He's out there doing the ministry. So 6 days a week he's working. And on the seventh day, or the first day of the week, you might want to say, he's out there, or the seventh day, he's out there working, for the Lord. He's doing the Lord's work. But I have a feeling that, because the Bible doesn't tell us that Priscilla and Aquila were God-fearing, they weren't believing Jews, as we have seen Luke point out many times of other people. Remember how he would point out Jason, someone who feared God, as he will say here in a little while. Crispus, someone who feared God. So he's going to kind of point out different people who fear God. He doesn't say that about Priscilla and Aquila. So my thinking, it's just that's my guess, it's a logical guess, that he began working with them, and through his working with them, he communicated Christ to them, and they became believers and began helping him in ministry and work. And became great assets, because later on he calls them his fellow workers in the Lord. Later on in his other letters, he refers to them as an ongoing part of his ministry. So it wasn't just this one time. It was a long-standing relationship he had, and it all began there. And so I started thinking about my own life. Most of you all know I work in addition to the church, and I have ministry that I do. And I think it's important that we all understand it's not just pastors that are called to be witnesses and to minister. And it's not just that we do it on Sundays. We're to do it our whole life. And it's to be all of us. Again, we're all in this team together to make it happen. And I was just talking to Eddie. Eddie and I work together. He works with me a lot. And we were over on Daniel Island and doing some work and talking to somebody. And I was talking to him about something. And I was sharing with him that I have a friend who's a good Christian. And I say good Christian. I said this to Eddie. I said, I call him a good Christian, but really, he's just a Christian like all of us. We all try to be good Christians, right? We all fail. We make mistakes. We all mess up. None of us are good, but we're trying. We're trying to do our best, right? So that's kind of how this guy is. Good guy. And he means well and all. But, he works a full-time job as like a, kind of a home remodeler and kind of stuff like that. If he's watching, he's probably going to hear me talking about him now. But anyhow, I doubt he's watching. But anyway, if he is, it's nothing bad. But maybe he'll learn something from this. This is just my observation. So one day we went to look at, I had this person I did a lot of work for, but they wanted to have this major project done. They wanted to have the whole backside of their house ripped off, take their screen porch, make it into like a sunroom, so it have windows and frame it all in, and rip out a wall, put in a beam. It was work that I obviously can do. I have those skills to do it. I just don't have the labor time, or that would be too big a job for me to do. So I brought in a friend of mine. I brought this guy, and I said, hey, you got this. You do this full time. This is your whole thing. I said, I can bring you in, and you and I work it together. You bring in your guys, and me and my guys will help you. And that way I can work when I can work. When I can't work, I'm just not going to be here. But you'll keep the job going. And you can finish the job, and you and I just work out something, how much ever, I'll decide how much, and we'll negotiate how much I can make off the job. And he said, okay, that sounds good. So I brought him over there. And this guy, started talking about the job, and, was giving him the estimate and stuff. Well, he started like preaching Jesus to me, okay? And, they're actually, good, these are good people. I don't know, I think they're believers. I believe they are. Because they're always talking to me about praying for my mom, always asking me about them. I don't know necessarily where they go to church or what. They may even go to a Catholic church, but I'm not sure. But, they're very religious people. And he started preaching, talking about, just preaching Jesus in the middle of, giving this estimate and quote. And, when it was all said and done, they gave the job to somebody else. Now, it might have been different reasons why they gave the job to somebody else. But I told Eddie, I said, you know what? Sometimes that turns people off. I said, the way I do it, I preach Jesus by, I go in and I do the work, and I do a work as unto the Lord, glorifying God unto the Lord. And then while I'm doing it, as I'm building that relationship with them on a professional level, I can show them Jesus in my work, and then I often get opportunity to share Jesus as I'm there working, And so it's just an insight that I had, and I thought that's the way we should all be, You don't just walk straight up to somebody the first time you ever meet them and say, let me preach Jesus to you. Let me tell you about Jesus. Well, first of all, that could work. As we talked about last week, sometimes God just opens the door, right? And sometimes you just have an opportunity to share Jesus, just like that. Sometimes the person asks you to talk about Jesus, which is the case we talked about last week. But oftentimes that turns people off, and oftentimes that turns them away. So, we just have to understand it's a whole life, and we take every opportunity we can to share Jesus. I'm thinking that Paul lived his life like that, and perhaps that's the result was Priscilla and Aquila. Okay? So now you know all about Priscilla and Aquila, fellow workers of Paul.
Right.
Yes.
Sometimes we just have to be, and maybe it means that someone has to talk to you and tell you, but I know a guy who is he's just loud.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he purposely sets out his day to be obnoxious, but he is.
Yeah.
And he's a preacher.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's got to be, it's a turn off to people that like him.
Yeah.
Let alone, I mean, even the type that, you're in a restaurant, it's time to pray. Well, stand up and the whole restaurant's going to hear
Oh,
you.
yeah, I mean, boisterous.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, really, he's not raising his voice because he's always loud.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it just means, again, we're always a testimony.
Tammy says,
We're always a witness.
She's always saying, Robbie, keep it down. I said, well, I must be getting deaf or something. I think I talk louder than what I think I am. Anyway, yeah, that's a good point. And we got to understand that.
Like you said, we're always a witness.
Yes, that's it. And that's something to be mindful of, because obviously we want to be a good witness, right? We don't want to be a bad witness. And often we got to make sure that we're not being a bad witness in how we're living or kind of what we're doing and how we're reacting, that kind of thing. All right, well, I know we kind of got off on a tangent, but let's go ahead and get through 5 through 8 as we look at this next little segment here. It says, when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. But when they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook his garments and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads, I am clean, for from now on I will go to the Gentiles. And he departed from there and entered the house of a certain man named Justice, one who worshipped God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Then Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his household. And many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. All right, so we got a couple of things here. First of all, Silas and Timothy have returned from Macedonia, or Thessalonica specifically is where they were. Remember, that's whenever they got Paul out of there in a hurry because people were wanting to string him up. And so he got out of there, and Silas and Timothy now have come back. No doubt they are giving reports. If you read in other letters in Timothy, if you read 1st and 2nd Timothy, you will find out that Timothy was giving a report to Paul about how the believers there in Thessalonica were doing so good and were standing strong in the faith. Well, that just encouraged Paul so much that he felt compelled by the Spirit. I'm going to go out and start preaching to more Jews and see if we can't get a church planted here. See if we can't get something just like we had started in Thessalonica. See if we can't get it started here. So that's kind of what Paul's thinking was. He goes out to do it, but you know how sometimes you have something in mind that you want to happen, but it don't always go like you planned? That's kind of how it happened with Paul. He was like, I'm going to go out here and these people are going to accept this, and people are going to get excited, and we're going to see, people believe and people be baptized, and it didn't happen that way. You have people out there, being angry and yelling and blaspheming, and so it was a bad sight. So after being met with this opposition, Paul responds in a way he has never responded yet. Because this isn't the first time Paul has been opposed. How has he responded in the past when he's experienced opposition?
Shake the dust off and move on.
Well, normally he would just kind of keep on going and keep on preaching.
Get lynched.
Yeah, he would just like, I don't care whether you don't like me or not, I'm just going to keep on preaching to you. And then usually it would be to the point where they were like either grabbing him up or, beating him or trying to kill him or whatever. But he would never be stopped. But in this case, he just like, okay, I'm done with y'all. I'm done with it. He said, I'm shaking the dust off, which was a way in that culture. Even Jesus talked about it whenever he was sending out the 70 witnesses. Remember he said, come to a town, they welcome you in, so-and-so, whatever, take what they give you, don't take any money for your trip, you take a garment with you and all this, but if they reject you, then shake the dust off your feet and then go on to the next place. And so this is kind of what Paul was doing. He shook the dust off. He was rejecting the fact that they were rejecting him. And then he resolved to reach the Gentiles. And this is something he hadn't said, he had never done. He'd never done this. He literally said, I'm done with the Jews. I'm going to go preach to the Gentiles now. I'm going to focus now on the Gentiles. Which, by the way, Paul had been reaching both. He had been going after both. But now he's choosing his focus, he's making it on the Gentiles. Now, one of those Gentiles, who is a believer in God, perhaps a proselyte to the Jewish faith, was Justice, or as some places else in the Scripture, he's called Titus Justice. But he's not the Titus who is the fellow laborer of Paul who wrote the book of Titus. He is another Titus. So, Titus Justice is this Gentile who believes in God. Now, he either hears of Paul and accepts faith and begins following Christ, but he encourages Paul along the way and provides him this base camp, if you will. He gives him like a place to stay, a place to gather himself, and it's right next door to the synagogue. So it's like Paul has a place where he can almost, snipe out people. You know what I mean? He's like a sniper now. He can take them out strategically. He's not no longer is he just going to stand out in the synagogue and preach to these Jews who are angry at him. Now he can kind of go and catch people, Gentiles who may be passing by the synagogue, or he's close by. Well, in the same opportunity there, the door is open for and I would say also that he used Justice's knowledge of the town and area to perhaps strategize and minister more effectively, and it seems to be working because God opens the door for him, literally and figuratively, to a leader of the synagogue named Crispus, who believes and follows Christ. So we're starting to see similar things that have happened in the past are happening now. So in a synagogue where the Jews were really angry with him, didn't want to believe, now you get an influential Jew, perhaps a part of the Sanhedrin or a Pharisee, if you will, now become a believer in Christ. And so this was encouraging to Paul. So God is sending encouragement. And we see the various means or various ways he is being encouraged. How is God encouraging Paul through these ways? What are some ways God is encouraging him?
Well, he's starting to make some headway.
Okay. He's making headway. He's starting to see some results of his work, right? How else is he encouraging, getting encouragement?
I think just to have fellow believers, when you go into like a missionary, going anywhere, going into a town, and when you first convert or you find someone there, just the encouragement that must be after what he's gone through. Yeah.
So this past Sunday, we had a gentleman come in. I was about 3/4 way through the sermon, and this guy walks in. And everybody walked in the door. Josh was out in the lobby, and the guy walked in and said, I need hope. And I saw on y'all's sign, it says, feeling hopeless, find hope here. And he says, where I go? And Josh was like, just come right on in here and have a seat. So he came in, he sat down, and kind of didn't really look at me much. He kind of had his head down most of the time while I finished the sermon. And after it was over with, there's a lot of people in front of me. I'm all the way front or back, however you look at it. I couldn't get back there to him. I wanted to get back there and speak to him, but I was glad I saw Pat over there talking to him. I said, well, praise the Lord, Pat's talking to him. At least somebody's talking to him. And, if I couldn't have chose a better person to go talk to him. So, eventually, I started working my way there. I keep getting intercepted and interrupted, because they did pastor's appreciation, which I, appreciated. It was awesome. Love that. But, so many distractions, and I'm trying to get back there to where Pat is. Finally, we get back there, long story short, Pat and I talk to the guy, and we just pray with him, and then he prays basically to receive Christ into his life. Now, whether he had done that before, or whether, this was the first time, or whether he was kind of rededicating his life, regardless, he was really making a commitment to following Jesus in his life and, asking God to help him. And so we were encouraged by that and tried to encourage him, invited him for tonight, invited him for Sunday, about, we're having our special service for the dinner and all. And so, he told us a little bit about his life. But then I said, well, I want to follow up with you because, Michael and I are always talking about, you get somebody new believer, somebody that's just making a decision like this, commitment to follow Jesus. And then we're like, okay, good. Go follow Jesus. And then we leave them out there, to get to the wolves, So I kind of encouraged them to say, hey, the enemy's going to come try to take you down, tell you, he's going to get on your back, and you need to have support, you need to have encouragement from the church family. And so I was trying to encourage him. I said, well, I'm going to follow up with you. I'm going to give you my card, so I can call you. I wasn't thinking. I give him the card, and send him on his way. He leaves, and then I'm thinking, I didn't get his number. How am I going to call him? He's got my number, but how am I going to call him? I thought, well, I told Joshua that was a dumb thing. I don't have any way of getting a hold of this guy. And I said, I'll follow up with him. I said, this is not good. I said, I should have got his number. And I said, well, hopefully he'll come back. Hopefully he'll show up Wednesday. This is what I was saying on Sunday. Well, apparently he called me Sunday. I didn't see where I got the call, but I looked at my voicemail and I got a voicemail from him. So I said, well, God, he called me back. So then I called him back. We had a long talk. But it was just encouraging, That kind of stuff's encouraging. It's encouraging when you meet other believers. It's encouraging when you see, somebody, getting encouragement. Somebody, making a commitment. Somebody finding hope. And that's what he said. He said, I wanted to thank y'all. I wanted to thank you and Pat for just taking some time to talk to me. He said, I was in a very dark place in my life and I needed that. And, he said, literally saved my life. So I was like, well, really, we didn't do anything. We were just, God was working in your heart. We just happened to be at the crossroads where God was working. We just happened to be the people with skin on that were there. But sometimes you need people with skin on. That's the encouragement. It's God providing them along the way. Maybe it's somebody coming along to help you. And this kind of thing happens. So there's various ways we can receive encouragement, not just from God's Word and reading God's Word. And the Spirit can encourage us, like we saw the Spirit kind of compelling Paul, encouraging him. It's also other believers and other people, and seeing the fruit of your labor.
Paul had given up on the Jews, and he meets the leader of the synagogue.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that
it still goes to show you that even though he said that, he wasn't totally saying, well, I'm done with the Jews, right? He said it, but then at the same time he wanted to still show love to all people, regardless of whether they were Jew or Gentile. And we know from his other writings, book of Romans, that wasn't the case, right? He said to the Jew first and also to the Greek, right? So it's for everybody. All right, let's go ahead and finish up 9 through 17. Now the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision. Do not be afraid, but speak. Do not keep silent, for I am with you. No one will attack you to hurt you, for I have many people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, saying, this fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. And when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes, O Jews, there would be a reason why I should bear with you. But if it is a question of words and names and your own law, look to it yourself, for I do not want to be judge of such matters. And he drove them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things. Okay? So, obviously there's a lot of volatile stuff going on here. That doesn't sound good. Okay? We're hearing some people, some kind of like flash mob stuff going on. We're hearing some kind of violence happening here. And God knew all of this. See, here's the thing about God. We know this, but sometimes we don't always know about it. God already knows what's going to happen. Right? Why do you think God told Paul this night vision? Why do you think God had to give him this night vision?
Because he knew he was going to come up against that opposition.
Yeah, and I have a feeling Paul was afraid. The implication here is Paul was scared. He was getting scared. He was getting afraid. And maybe Paul was like, well, maybe I'm not going to be as much of an outspoken witness. Maybe I'm going to stop doing what I was doing. Maybe I'm not going to preach Jesus anymore around, this city. I don't know if that was the case or not. But literally, God calls him in a vision and says, Paul, do not be afraid. Do not keep silent. Speak out. He literally tells him that, right? And so the implication here is Paul might have been thinking, might have been second guessing himself, but God's given him this vision that says, hey, I'm going to protect you. And then he says this, interesting, and you might not even catch it, I've caught it. He said, I have many people in this city. Now remember, this is a city of wickedness and immorality. It's just a perverted city, and yet the Lord has many people in the city. Many people the Lord has on the side. How often do we think in ministry and in our lives that we are all alone, or we think maybe we just have a few people with us? What we don't understand is there's other people all around us trying to do the same work. And we don't even know it. Or maybe we're trying to reach somebody, or maybe we're trying to, be an encouragement to somebody. And what we don't know is maybe there's other people that are trying to be an encouragement, trying to reach them as well. So we just don't see everything that God sees. And so God says to us, hey, my kingdom is bigger than you think, and I've got armies that you don't know of, and I've got people working that you don't even know about. And don't be discouraged, don't be afraid.
And this is just right after, based on your thought that he was maybe scared, it kind of makes sense, because this is right after the Holy Spirit told him to go talk to people.
Yeah.
He did. When they confronted him, he just said, oh, okay, I'm done with y'all.
Yeah, exactly.
Because either he was truly frustrated or he was getting out. Because he's been having these situations where people are getting closer and closer to hurting him.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And it's getting constant, isn't it?
Right. This is just a few verses right after where he said, all right, I'm done with y'all.
Yep. And so you get the indication that he was afraid and that he was, second guessing, whatever it could have been happening. But he sticks it out, and obviously he obeys the Lord because he preaches for another year and a half. So he has this long, extended ministry, which is where we get the work of the Church of Corinthians started here. This is the beginning of it.
And even that, some of the length of his ministry could have been sort of what Lynn was talking about earlier. God put those people around him that protected him, encouraged him.
That's right.
I mean, right here, he just had a guy that basically got in these people's faces.
Yeah. And here he's threatened, and then as soon as he's threatened by this mob who brings him up before basically the governor, who has the power to have him jailed, which, by the way, he's no stranger to jailing. I mean, this has pretty much been a regular thing. But in this case, the governor who has all the power goes, oh, what is this about? Your words, your customs, your rules? I ain't dealing with that. Y'all just deal with it yourself. Get out of my presence, right? And it's like the Lord said, see, Paul, because Paul was about to open his mouth, right? Paul was about to speak out, and let me say something. And he's like, oh, is this what this is about? No, I'm not even hearing this. Y'all go your way. And then finally, the guys that are obviously bringing up all the accusations, they're the ones that get beaten, right? The leader of the synagogue who's causing all the trouble, he's the one that gets beaten. Not Paul. Paul's not even, he kind of got thrown to the wayside. And obviously his ministry is blessed in the end, that God protects him from it all. And I wonder, has God ever encouraged you that way? Literally by kind of giving you a promise. Maybe he gives you a promise from his word, maybe something you read and you believe, and you say, okay, Lord, I believe this. And then next thing you know, he just shows it to you in real life application. He just demonstrates it. Because that's what he did. He tells Paul in the vision that he's going to protect him, and then he demonstrates it in real life. Has that ever happened to you? Where you see God telling you something in His Word, you read it, or you hear it in a message, or whatever, and then next thing you know, it's applied in real life, and you say, man, that's how it worked. God did exactly what He said He was going to do. I'm sure if we can think about it, that's happened in our lives. Well, that's what happened with Paul there. And pretty cool how it all worked out. So remember the three things: the fellow workers, encouragement for the work, protection from harm. Now, we can learn from this because God has given us all fellow laborers. We're all in this ministry together. We're all a ministry team. We're all working together. Can you remember some of the others that were part of Paul's ministry team besides Timothy, besides Luke, besides Silas? Can you remember anybody else that might have been considered a part of his ministry team? We learned 2 of them, maybe even 3 tonight.
Priscilla.
Okay, Priscilla. Okay.
We met Justice tonight.
Justice tonight, yeah.
And the guy, the leader of the synagogue.
Yeah. So Crispus.
I knew it almost rhymed with Justice.
Yeah. And then how about going back into the cities before that he's come from? How about Philippi? You remember who he met out of Philippi that became kind of one of his kind of laborers and helpers? Lydia, yeah. Lydia was one of them. And the jailer obviously became a disciple and a follower of Christ as well. Fellow laborer, that's kind of who we believe, maybe between Lydia and this jailer, that we don't even know his name, that's kind of who we believe probably was the beginning of the church there in Philippi. Remember, that was a place where they didn't even have a synagogue, because the women were meeting down by the river. So, yeah, many of them. And we could go back as far as, remember Jason, who took Paul in to his house and protected him with his own life. That's another laborer of Paul. So we have lots of different people that are part of this ministry team. And sometimes we just think of Paul as being this lone ranger, but he wasn't. And we're all in this together. And that's something we got to remember. How about think about this whole tent making thing? How does that show us about our lives? What does that say about our lives?
Regardless of where you are, there's people to talk to.
Exactly. Right? Use our whole life as a witness. Whatever we might be doing, wherever we may be going, whatever area that might be. Whether Paul led Priscilla and Aquila to the Lord through his working with them, or they were already followers of Jesus, in any case, Paul used his whole life to show Jesus, even during that time. Also, God provides encouragement through life, through His promises in His Word, and then also through people that we encounter along the way, as we see people that come as a result of our work for the Lord, who come to know the Lord, as well as those who we meet along the way that are fellow believers. And then God protects us as we go and do His work. And that doesn't mean we just go haphazardly into dangerous situations, right? Use common sense. I'm not saying go out here and just, oh, God's going to protect me, so I'm just going to go down here in the middle of the night, in some dark street of North Charleston and start talking about Jesus. Well, that you might be fine, but you also might get shot, okay? And unless you're wearing a bulletproof vest, I wouldn't encourage it. God will protect us, though, when we're going and following His will and as He directs us. And then sometimes His protection comes as a result of others intervening for us. And I thought that was cool how God used Gallio for intervening for Paul's behalf. It wasn't something Paul had done. He didn't even get to open his mouth. This guy just spoke up. And God even uses other people to intervene for us at times to protect us. And we understand that's all part of God's way of work. All right? All right, well, that was a long lesson tonight. Anyhow. A lot was covered in there. I hope it was encouraging to you. We're going to wrap up this evening with some prayer. If you have a prayer request, if you're joining us online and you'd like us to pray for you, we would love to be able to do that. You can do that several ways. You can leave your prayer request in the comment section, or you can go to our website, riveroakcc.org/pray, and click on that prayer tab there and list your prayer requests, and we will begin praying for you. God bless you, and we hope to see you very soon.